Hello, and welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast, perspectives on aviation lives, lifestyles, and business.
Hello, this is Chris Kirk at Wild Blue Aircraft Sales and our inaugural Into the Blue podcast, a podcast that really has less to do with actual aircraft sales than it does just bringing forth some interesting, maybe some fun stories and background tidbits as we run along. I've got Todd Mitton with me here. Todd is one of our aircraft sales advisors. And hey, if you are looking at selling an airplane, we'd love to talk with you. But we're going to talk a little bit about Todd's background here. So, Todd, you want to give a quick introduction?
Well, Chris, I am excited about today and about this opportunity to share our thoughts with people who choose to listen to our podcast, talk about aviation, and learn what other people think about aviation. You asked about my background. I've been flying for almost 40 years now. In fact, I soloed 40 years ago in June.
Geez, man, you're old.
I know, I'm getting up there. I learned in a flying club, learned how to fly back then, and went on to get my ratings, become a flight instructor, and kind of took a little bit of a sidestep in the late 80s and joined the Air National Guard and was a C-130 navigator for 30 years in a career in the Air National Guard. I wear glasses, didn't have the chance to actually become a pilot in the Guard, but I had a wonderful career and flew that airplane around the world as a navigator. As I said, during that time, I continued to flight instruct. Ultimately, I flew freight for a freight operator. I then flew for TWA for a few years, and then American Airlines after that. So I guess I have a fairly broad-based background in aviation.
Those of you that know us realize that we're here in Kansas City, and what's interesting is that Todd and I had kind of somewhat parallel aviation background. And we never really met until, what's it been, 2.5 years ago, I guess?
2.5 years, yep.
And we both went to University of Kansas, Rock Chalk, and, we've since been talking with each other and realized that we knew a lot of the same, or still do know a lot of the same people, but we just never did meet there. So, Todd is, what are you, a year or two older than I am, so a year or two earlier and ahead of me in college. But I found that kind of interesting that we'd run the same circles, so to speak, but never really came in contact with each other until you just happened to be getting close to retiring from the Guard and we're interested in doing something else.
Well, that's exactly right. I was actually, several years ago, I had met another pilot that actually did some aircraft sales and brokering and managed some aircraft, and I felt like that would be a wonderful opportunity to stay involved in general aviation or get involved maybe in a greater degree than I had been in the previous 20 years. So if you recall, I emailed you out of the blue one day looking at your website, and this was back in November of 2017. And, I don't know what you thought about that when you received the email, but probably went to your spam folder. But nonetheless, you emailed me back pretty quickly. You recall that?
Yeah. And then we met at some breakfast joint over in Liberty and had a good conversation and kind of, I think, hit it off from that point and just kind of started seeing that there's some possibilities here. So, hey, give everybody here a sense of, how did you get into flying though? Anyway, you were a kid, you started, like a lot of us flying when you were a teenager. Is that something you always wanted to do, or how did that work out?
I was the kind of kid that, that rode my bicycle to the airport growing up in Moline, Illinois, the Quad Cities. In summer mornings before I had a driver's license and my buddies would sleep in late, I would get up early and ride my bicycle 3 or so miles out to the airport and just watch the United and Ozark airliners and the John Deere corporate jets take off and land. And that led me to well, a friend of mine, actually, his dad had learned to fly in a flying club. I didn't have a dad or an uncle or somebody close to me that was a pilot, so this was kind of all on my own. I just had an interest, and then because this friend of mine's dad had learned in a flying club, that helped me to gain some familiarity with that world, and so that's how I got started. I was 16 years old, and I told my dad. I said, "Hey, Dad, I want to learn to fly." He said, "Well, if you're going to learn to fly, you're going to get a job." So I like to tell people I worked as an eating utensil cleansing engineer at that time, and I used that money to pay for flying lessons. I paid for them on my own. I worked hard as a dishwasher. I remember being late to work one Saturday because I had been flying that day with someone in the flying club. We took an airplane to Ohio for some reason and got back, and by the time I got back, it was after the start of my work time, but it was worth it to me. So that was kind of my initial start. Those are fun days to think about, learning in that flying club. And
did you get your license before you graduated from high school?
Oh yeah, I was 17. I was still a junior in high school.
Yeah,
and
me too.
Probably if I have a regret though, thinking back to those days, it's that I didn't pursue it hard enough at the time. I had no guidance, and even though I was in a flying club, and I still am a big believer in flying clubs, but I kind of wish I'd have had someone that had really taken me under their wing, so to speak, and led me to pursue my ratings more quickly. You know, one of the challenges, you might recall this, was at that time you had to have 200 hours to get an instrument rating, which would obviously be your next step after a private license. Well, when you're 17 years old and working as a dishwasher, paying for your own flying, 200 hours seems like
that's a lot.
It's a lot. That was a wonderful change that came along later when the FAA lowered the requirement to 125 hours, but by that time it was a lot of time had passed. I don't remember what year that was. So yeah, to answer your original question, I think that I just had an interest in it from the time I was very young. Thanks to the Quad City Airport there, I even had a aviation radio, could listen to what was then called Moline Approach and Moline Tower, and just was always my interest from a young age, and I do feel fortunate to have spent my career involved in aviation, something that I love.
You know, Todd and I have both been involved in aviation for the vast majority of our lives, and some of you may be listening that it doesn't even really matter your age, I suppose, but you're interested in getting into it, and there's really just not any one particular way to start and then to get to whatever your goal is. Maybe your goal is to just have an airplane of your own and to fly that airplane. Maybe your goal is to actually fly for a career. There's 100 different ways to go down those paths, and it's good, like Todd said, to have a mentor if you can find one. I didn't really either, other than just some of the guys that you talked to. My granddad got me into flying, but if you get that mentor that can help you along, because if you look at Todd's career, he did that. You were a flight engineer. You flew some charter. You did your CFI, airline pilot, flew navigator in the Guard, retired as an 06 in the Guard, and you talk about just a wide range of experience that it takes a long time before you come by that, but that's just one path.
Well, and then you look at the opportunities within aviation. You kind of hit the nail on the head when you talk about whether you want to do this just for fun as a private pilot, maybe never own an aircraft, maybe own an aircraft. I mean, that's intimidating thoughts in its own right, but whether you just want to do it for pleasure, whether you want to do it as an asset to a business that you've developed or working on or own, or whether you want to do it as a career, and even career-wise, people think a lot about the airlines or the military, but there is certainly many other avenues of flying that people get involved in. I mean, there's flying airplanes in Alaska. There's float planes. There's banner towing. There's flight instruction. There's charter. There's small freight carriers. There's just such a wide variety. There's obviously helicopters and that angle too. So it's hard to even know all the opportunities. Fortunately, today there's a lot more information out there than I think there used to be when we were young. I mean, certainly you have YouTube videos. I mean, to me, to know what was going on behind a cockpit door would have just been incredible. I couldn't even imagine what it's like today. There's countless videos on YouTube and other ways to learn about aviation.
So you said your dad told you get a job, which makes sense. Were your parents otherwise pretty supportive of you, going down that path?
So my dad was my first passenger, and we went out on a cold day. I got my license in January of 1981, and so again, it was a flying club, Cessna 150, and so I want my dad to be my first passenger. We go out to the airport on a cold January day. Didn't preheat the airplane. I didn't know enough to preheat an airplane, but the airplane sat outside at that time,
Sure.
which was common, and we primed that thing, and my dad helped me get started. Here, he's not a pilot, but I didn't have a big mechanical background, and anyway, we get this Cessna 150 started. Finally, we taxi out, we take off, we broke ground, and he says, "All right, you got me up in the air. Let's get back down." But he did fly with me. I said, "Come on, Dad, we got to fly around the Quad Cities." So we did for a half hour and had a good time. And I'm sure, many years later, a real thrill for me was flying TWA DC-9s and then MD-80s into Moline, landing at the airport that I had learned to fly at, and my parents meeting me. This was pre-9/11 days, and of course you could go meet somebody getting right off the jetway, and to meet my parents, I'm sure that it was a source of pride to them. Was I supported directly? Well, one of the things I learned from my dad was that I did not, and I try to apply this to my own two sons, and that is that he gave me the okay on whatever I wanted to pursue in life, and so that I think that's a good piece of advice, and I'm happy he did that.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is Todd's got two boys. One of them's still at KU, right?
Yes.
And well, more or less at these times. But the other is waiting Air Force pilot training down in Enid, Oklahoma, at Vance Air Force Base. Grant, we'll have to have him on sometime to talk a little bit about his experience going through pilot training. But when you were in college, how did you fly much? Were you pursuing ratings then? Were you just trying to keep your head above water?
Well, you remember out the Lawrence Airport, because I know you flew out there also. And when I got to college, freshman year, 1982, I went out to what was then called Lawrence Aviation in Lawrence, Kansas, and I got myself checked out in a 152. And my roommate, who I was just put together with in a dormitory room, he was a student pilot. He ultimately became a Navy pilot, by the way. But he and I went out and rented an airplane, flew around a little bit. So I did a little bit, but just enough to keep myself current. And that was about it, all I could afford and all I was comfortable with at the time. But eventually, later in college, Lawrence Aviation went out of business, and Hedrick Air Service took over, of course. And then, and the last couple of years I was in college, I got a job out there working for Hedrick Air Service as a line boy, which was a great job, by the way. I loved it, and so that led to my opportunity to start pursuing ratings. Where I got my instrument rating, I had made up my mind I was going to pursue it professionally. Finally, midway through my college experience, and while the University of Kansas was not an aviation school, I went ahead and just went to the airport and pursued my own Part 61 training and instrument commercial and CFI, and then ultimately flight instructed a little bit in Lawrence.
So you had your CFI by the time you got out of school.
Well, that's a good story too. I took my my last final at the University of Kansas. I took an extra semester there, and I took my last final in December of '86. I can't tell you the exact date, but if I were to look in my logbook, I could, because that morning I took my last final. That afternoon I took my CFI check ride.
Oh wow, that's
with Ken Godfrey over in Topeka, Kansas. So yeah, that was so literally I graduated from college and I started to become a flight instructor immediately. That was my first out of college job.
Didn't you tell me one time you flew that 152 they had over there at Vinland Valley?
Oh yeah. I used to rent airplanes there from Vinland then too. That was an opportunity. I mean, they had some rental airplanes down there, a better scenario than they had up at Lawrence, I think. And so I rented, I think, a Cardinal too down there. Did you fly a Cardinal?
I never flew the Cardinal. I flew the 152 from what's the name of the business that's over there? McFarland Aviation. Yeah, for those of you that aren't from this area, Vinland Valley is a kind of a quaint little grass/gravel strip, kind of between, more or less between Lawrence and Baldwin, Kansas, and it's a fun little airport to fly out of. And they had a 152 at the time that is, kind of these circles that they're crossing that we both had rented. For all I know, we probably passed the airplane off to each other at one point in time.
Possibly.
But I had several friends that rented that airplane. It was a good little operation there. Good stories out of there we can tell at a different time. But and so then after you got out of KU, then what?
Well, again, I started flight instructing. To do it full time, I went to the now closed Richards-Gebaur Airport. There was a guy there who had two Cessna 150s, a tiny little flight school, and this was at Richards-Gebaur in the Kansas City area. And you remember, of course, the big air show they used to have at RG.
Yeah.
And through that, I met the 139th Airlift Wing up at St. Joseph, Missouri, had a C-130 at the air show, and I met the crew, and plus a buddy of mine had joined the Air National Guard. I started to become familiar with the Air Guard at St. Joseph, and that led to me calling a guy named Tom Beal. Tom's long since passed away, but Tom was the chief navigator in the late '80s, and that's who hired me up there. He was a peach of a guy. Gosh, what a nice guy. But so that was led to my involvement with the Guard. After I flight instructed just for a little while, Richards-Gebaur, got hired by KCAC, Kansas City Aviation Center, Johns County Executive Airport. So I moved over to Olathe and was still pursuing joining the Guard. It's kind of a long process before you go to officer training and all that. And so I worked at KCAC for about a year.
What year was that?
It was 87 and 88.
87,
so it was a little over a year I worked there. And that was a great job too. Back when flight instructing, I mean, they treated it as a job you had to get medical insurance and other benefits. They had a pay structure that the more you flew, the more you could earn on a per hour basis. So one of the interesting stories of that time in my life was we flew a traffic reporter around, a traffic watch type of a flying, where we flew this Piper Archer at morning and afternoon, and we had several guys that took turns doing it, so you didn't have to do it every day. But it was long, because you'd go out for 2 to 2.5 hours and just fly over the Kansas City area, and the reporter would come on live with several different radio stations at different times, and excuse me, and he or she would do the reporting, and you did the flying. So it was a good time builder, and it was a good consistent. It was the first job too that I had where you really had to go fly. If the weather met the minimums, you were expected to fly, and that's a challenge, I think, for any new pilot. Don't you? That
yeah, you don't know if you can say no.
Yeah, and that's part of it, saying no, and also though just getting out into conditions that challenge you. Stronger crosswinds. It's easy to sit at home and go, well, it's just not a very nice day today. The winds are blowing, gusting to 14 or 18 or something, and so I'm not going to go fly. But when you are required to go fly to make sure you can get the traffic reporter up in the air, it forces you to push your boundaries. I'm not, of course, advocating doing anything unsafe or illegal, or violates an FAR or whatever. But we did go when the ceiling was 1200 overcast, or when the winds were gusty or whatever. Yeah. That's just what you had to do.
Those were the days when John Wagner, the Sky Spy, used to fly around, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Johnny Rollins, for those of you in the Kansas City area, there were 3 airplanes up in the air all the time. You had to look out for those guys too. But and Johnny was great to work with. He's a nice guy, and because he would talk on. We had an interplane frequency we would use, but Sky Spy John Wagner wouldn't talk.
Yeah, he was kind of a loose cannon,
cowboy. Yeah. So
I remember driving down the highway and seeing him. Didn't he fly like a turbo
Aero 4?
An Aero 4. That's what I thought. And I remember going down I-35 one day, headed towards downtown, and all of a sudden I didn't see anything go on, and then just out of the corner of my eye, I see this airplane about 1,000 feet rack it up to about 60 degrees and start this turn around. I'm like, but I know who that is. And sure enough, it was John Wagner, the Sky Spy out there.
Exactly. And I don't know how he managed to do that just for one station. Johnny one day said, "Hey, can I give you a call?" This was on the interplane radio frequency. And I didn't know Johnny. I still don't today, to be honest. But he called. He asked if he could give me a call. And at the time, the Royals season was starting up, and 980 KMBZ radio station here in the Kansas City area carried the Royals games, Kansas City Royals baseball team, and they were on the traffic reports done, and he was so busy with all the other traffic flying he was doing, he asked if I'd be interested in just flying for him and doing that, and I had to turn him down because I just thought, I didn't get into flight instruction, pursue all this to get involved in radio announcing, so I respectfully declined his offer, but that was always a little fun side story I've told off and on.
Yeah. Well, you can see that, just Todd talking here, regardless of what your experience level is, if you're just looking to get into it, how one thing often leads to another, and, doors open up and there's opportunities out there. Sometimes you got to put yourself into uncomfortable situations. I don't mean dangerous or unsafe, just situations maybe you hadn't thought about going down that direction and taking advantage of doing something new. So we're going to try to keep these at roughly 30 minutes a piece, and I think we're getting pretty close to that time. But got a lot of ideas for future podcasts and rabbit trails that we can go down, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this. So again, Todd Mitton, Chris Kirk here at Wild Blue. If you want to visit with us directly, just give us a call. 816-729, I'm sorry, that's my cell phone number. How about an office number? 816-479-2723 is the office number. And you can check us out at flywildblue.com. Look forward to sharing a little more of our history with you and some other just aviation tidbits.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. Find us online at flywildblue.com. And don't forget to subscribe and share.